world will your legacy be? Yeah, yeah.
12 teams are back this summer in Rhode Island, and we're back here on the Postgame show. I have Kyler standing by. I'm Joey. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to break down all the Week 1 action of the summer 2024 season, get to all the games, and even take a look at Week 2 in a second. But really, Week 1, I mean, it's the first time seeing these teams only one game in single digits. So, some of the other leagues have seen some kind of closer finishes early on. We had a lot of wider margin games that, kind of mostly went according to serve. I know we'll talk about my team, which, didn't go according to serve, and I say it that way because a lot of the returning teams usually have an advantage, right? Having played in the league before, and some of the newer teams really held their own and, kept it competitive. So, Kyler, let's start with that last game of Week 1 on day 2. So we have 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. We're going to start with the closest game from Week 1, All Waves taking down Providence Defense 71-64. And we're going to get to Kyler and the stats in a second to break down, kind of what happened in that one. But again, the All Waves and a close fourth quarter, a close third quarter. I mean, we can talk about the second quarter being the difference, but a really back and forth game. And it was just the All Waves kind of keeping Providence defense, at arm's length, right? It was never really super close, but it was always a single digit game. And the All Waves kind of always had an answer. So Kyler, on that note and the All Waves and that team, your first time seeing them, a lot of returning players, some new faces, but a lot of returning players, Corey Strickland, Terrence Gallo, but some of their newer players, made some shots and played some defense and had an impact. So how were they able to improve to 1-0?
Yeah, I mean, it was a close game, but it never felt that close, and it never felt that one team had a big, size advantage, anything over the other teams, but that the All Waves just really cruised to a 7-point victory. I know that sounds odd because a 7-point victory is not that much, but neither of these teams I have entirely high in my power rankings just because I didn't think that any stood out that much. I thought that the best player on the All Waves was definitely Jake Asheter, but he only had 14 points, and that's not to take away from Joshua DePina, who had 27 points.
Sorry, I was muted. No, I love it. And so let's kind of scroll down a little bit and take a look at Providence defense here on the screen. And if you're listening, all the stats are up on the legacyleagues.com after every game. But Jacob Darber in his first game, 20 points. Jesus Thames, hopefully we're getting these names right, with 18 of his own. So Providence defense, a new team, but is one of those teams that I kind of talked about, seemed to adjust quickly to the pace, to some of the different types of plays where it's a little faster and turning that defense into offense. So let me kind of stop sharing the screen.
You can really tell the new teams struggle to shoot early on, I think, and I think that's going to change because you go to a court practice, it's not legacy leagues. You come to the legacy leagues to practice on those 8.5 feet rims, and that's really what you're going to get with those returning teams in Week 1. So I only have Providence defense just 2 spots lower than the All Waves on my power rankings because I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that flipped around. Just give Providence defense a little bit more time.
I love it. The teams, after kind of hearing, and I love it, using your power rankings, the official power rankings will be out soon by the time you're watching this. So check on social for that. We rank all 12 teams, but people will be coming up to you, Kyler, being like, "Oh, I heard you. You had us lower than this team, and now we just kicked their butt." So I like it.
I'm unbiased.
Good.
Show me otherwise if you want to.
That's right. Well, let's get to another game that was super competitive and actually kicked off the week. Let's get to Lob City scoring 79 points, the defending champs, kicking off our summer 2024 season against All Talk Sports, another one of those new teams. So, a very, very a familiar team, a team that's familiar with the league in Lob City, clearly having won 8 of these against All Talk Sports. And, it was competitive, was one of the things that I think stood out, and I'll kind of get the box score up here. But it's a lot of this show is going to be kind of seeing what Kyler thought about kind of seeing these teams for the first time, right? It doesn't matter to the new analysts how teams played in the past because they weren't there, right? So what did you see from the defending champs and Lob City? I know it was the first game, so there, you might have been going crazy as well, kind of trying to figure everything out. But from whatever you remember, and we'll get to the stats, Kyler, Lob City, what did they do to impress you?
I mean, they did everything to impress me. They seemed to outmuscle the All Talk Sports, and it just didn't. For the first 5 minutes, I was worried for them, and then for the next 35, I was not so worried. I really thought that All Talk Sports played really well, but you could just see as they walked in, they saw us all with our gear on. They were like surprised by how official this all was, and you could tell that wasn't ready. The other player, Nick Ricci on All Talk Sports, had 5 turnovers on the first half. Now, in the second half, he was great, but you could tell maybe he was a little shell-shocked at the start, and that's what happened. I have All Talk Sports in my 5, so that's better than some teams who won. I think they could really be a team who pushes, but I think that to start off being a little bit nervous, then to go up against Lob, who are just dominant, that's not a recipe for success, and that's why they lost by so much. Let's look out for All Talk Sports as the season goes on.
He's already given you sleeper teams. I like it as we kind of look at the stats here. Steven Soulier, 21, and a huge block as Kyler was putting together the top plays, but also 6 made threes for him. So he was kind of leading the way for All Talk Sports. And as we go up here for a second, Colin Burns, a familiar face, a finals MVP in past seasons, 24 points. And our reigning finals MVP, Joe Secator, with 18 of his own. And Nuri, another very, very familiar face, 14 and 5, and Cody Crawford with 10, but couldn't make a 3, which is something he usually does a lot for Lob City. So it's funny, you talk about that shell-shockedness, right? And we're going to go over the other games that were a little wider margined more quickly, but just on the point of Lob, we're going to talk a lot about them because usually they're around deep into the playoffs, right? So,
yeah.
so not that we're not going to talk about anybody now, but even just kind of what you saw, I think they still deserve their shine, right? So just first impressions of Lob. I know All Talk impressed you, and I think getting the defending champs and that shell shockness that I made up a word and said about like, oh my God, this is official. Like now we're here and we have to perform, and it's a really good team. They settled in. Like you said, I think is very, very fair, and next week will be different for a lot of teams. But on Lob City, what about them? I'm sure they're your favorite. I'll put you on the spot. For right now, it's one game and things change. But what stood out about them to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Colin Burns stood out. I don't know how you stop him, but what really stood out to me other than that was that they had rotations of players on. They had plenty of subs, and every single player they had could hit shots, could play defense. It was like there's no weakness to this team. With a lot of teams, maybe there's a player or two who teams went after a little extra. Not on Lob. They were great offensively, they were great defensively, and that's just such a recipe for success. I don't see how they could lose, but plenty of season, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and a lot of the returning teams will play each other, so whoever did the schedule knows what's going on. It was me. But Lob will take on the Game Breakers. They will take on the Road Dogs, who we're going to get to in a second, who both looked good in Week 1. They'll get that finals rematch with the Halfway Crooks, which is where we're going next. And I'm looking at the stats beforehand. I swear we prepare a little bit. I pull up the score to the Halfway Crooks game, and it was a 9-point game. So 2 single-digit games in Week 1. Margin-wise, let's get to that second 9-point win for the Washed Up Boys.
Yeah.
All right, so like I talked about, the Halfway Crooks fall in Week 1 to the Washed Up Boys, a new team, 70-61. Some familiar faces for the Halfway Crooks, a little short-handed. And the Washed Up Boys, led by Hendel LaRolle, just 35 points, 3 of 9 from 3, was super effective field goal-wise, getting into the paint. This was the last game on Monday, so just to kind of refresh everyone's memory, let's get over to Kyler. Let's talk about the Washed Up Boys and kind of what they did, and it was really that fourth quarter. Again, we'll get the stats up here in a second. They won the fourth quarter by 8. They win the game by 9. So there you go. They were able to get a little separation in that fourth quarter and finish the deal. So how did they do that? What shifted? I'll give you my opinion in a second, being up close and personal with this game, having played. But What did they do in that fourth quarter?
I think they kept their heads is what they did. They did a really good job keeping their heads. There were some potentially rough calls by some referees, and there was definitely a lot of talking, I know between Dominic Lanston, who scored the most points, was probably Halfway Cook's best players. I mean, let's not discredit 3 for 3 from 3 points for Joey Zocco. We can't talk about that. But Dominic was definitely chirping, talking to the refs a lot. Well, it seemed like the washed up boys were just cool, calm, and collected throughout the whole game, and that's why maybe at the end it got a little rough as not just Dominic but the whole team lost their heads a little bit, and the washed up boys just kept playing their game, and that's why they were able to pull ahead.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, and you can see the stats still up here, comes down to the shooting too, right? So I know you can see there, for the washed up boys, we talked about Hendel Leroll kind of leading the way, 9 of 21 from 3, so 43%. That's a good percentage if you're going to take that many and making 9 of them. The Halfway Crooks, 12 of 29, which is right around 42%. And I was talking to, Dominique and Charles Correa and Jared Hansen, our entire team. So we made 12, as in the Halfway Crooks. 4 or 5 of them came in the last 2 minutes of trying to play some scramble ball, right? So during the first, 38 minutes of the game, it was much more like 6 or 7 of 22, which is not 40-something%, right?
Yeah.
And you could feel it.
He told me the ball was overinflated potentially, so we'll get that fixed, and maybe next time more shots will go in.
Well, we're not doing a Deflategate. And I must say, I swear, Owen Reed makes fun of me, who's a former intern and is now doing the Massachusetts League. And Greg Horn and I did a podcast last week in Connecticut. It's never too early to suck up. So I appreciate the shout out on the stats. But it was really, Dominique Langston and the washed up boys, again, hitting those shots in the fourth quarter. And I think that's where it flipped, right? And so just to kind of pinpoint, it was a close game to start the fourth. They hit a couple shots in a row. They got to the basket. They would kick it out for a 3. They kind of scored 5 or 7 or 8 points in a row at one point, and the Halfway Crooks just didn't and weren't able to score. And I know that's how you build a lead by definition, right? One team scores and the other team doesn't. I get that, but that was what happened. And the Halfway Crooks were never really able to overcome that. All right, our next game, to keep it moving, a returning team from 2 seasons ago holds off a new team that we definitely need to talk about. All right, so it is the Game Breakers back at it again a year later from when we last saw them in summer 2023. They take down the Skyhawks, a new team, 93-59. I'm not even going to put the stats up at any point because they're still a little they're messed up on the bottom with the totals, but the actual point figures are right. So I will give you some of those figures in a second. But it was really the second half, right, where the Game Breakers were able to pull away. So if I do math super quick, it didn't feel like that close of a game, or sorry, that wide of a margin of a game. So it looks like at halftime it was a 12-point game, which is kind of what it was for much of the first half, and it must have been early in that third quarter. The Skyhawks hit a couple threes in a row and cut it, which just makes sense math-wise, cut it to 6, right, from 12 to 6, and really we're like, oh, we might have a game. And I said this to Gian Avedijan after the game. I was like, I thought they were going to kind of keep this close and make you guys work, and the Game Breakers did work. They worked all the way to a over 30-point win, right, 34 points. So Let's go to the Game Breakers first, because that second half was them settling in, even as a returning team, and getting more comfortable, back used to what they are used to doing in this league. But your first time seeing the Game Breakers, what did they do in that second half that allowed them to pull away and put the Skyhawks away?
They hit threes. They hit a lot of threes. I know they're missing 2 of their bigs, so they may have resorted to a different game plan where they were shooting threes, but they shot well. They shot often, and they shot well, and that's how you rack up points quickly, is by hitting those threes. Of course, it's a returning team hitting threes on that lower rim. Skyhawks don't have that privilege of being able to have a season under their belt. I think maybe if this game was later on in the year, our final score would be closer, but I think that Game Breakers did really well adjusting to their lineup that they had, only had 1 or 2 subs, but were able to still get that lead and grow it late on by hitting those shots, and that's what matters.
Yeah, so 14 made threes. We're working on fixing the box score. It'll be fixed by the time you see this, but 14 threes for the Game Breakers in this one, 43% shooting, and 6 made threes for the Skyhawks. So it's funny, on the low rims, we talk about the dunks and the highlight plays, and we obviously promote those. It still helps if you can hit shots. We talked about it with the halfway crooks kind of not being able to this week, and the Game Breakers being able to, especially in that second half, and using the long ball to build the lead. All right, we're going to come back around to some of these teams, but let's kind of keep it moving here. 2 games left, and another returning team I talked about winning by 40. The Road Dogs return 125-85. They take care of Velocity, a new team with some familiar faces. It was a 65-point first half, and they scored another 60 points in the second half. There you go. It adds up 125, but it was a large margin, really, in that first quarter, 35-22, and they just kept building on it. Shaq Ardrey, a new player, 29 points, 8 rebounds. He looked good. Really a three-headed monster of 27-plus points in this game. Kareem Cooper with 28, and Anthony Lyons, the captain, 27 and 3 threes. So we'll get to Velocity in a second, who it turned up in the second half, just kind of being like a bunch of runouts and maintaining that lead for the Road Dogs. But the Road Dogs in that first half had to work, right? They had to build that lead. What did they do to build that lead?
They thrived off of energy is what they did. They hit a bunch of crazy dunks, got the energy high, were able to make it a back-and-forth game, and that's where they excel. Lobs, alley-oops, that's how they got their energy. That's how they were able to put up so many points so fast. Velocity weren't great defensively, but they do have some potential, I think. They were able to put up points when the game got stretched and less defense was being played, but I think all credit goes to the Road Dogs here and really all of their players for shooting well and not even having to shoot well because all their shots were right under the rim, dunks, lays, and just pure dominance.
Yeah, Lance McKenzie with 16 for Velocity, and as we kind of, and Joey Niederberger, who stuffed the stat sheet, 16, 7, 4 assists, and 3 blocks. Yeah,
play where he threw it up off the backboard and dunked in it. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and for the Road Dogs, it's funny, Jalen Ardrey with 18, Dale Butler, who's played in the league a couple years back, with 15. From seeing this team in past seasons, Mark Washington was one of their better players last season. He wasn't there. Rion Watts, shout out to him. He wasn't there in week 1. So we start kind of piecing this together, and they have the pieces to make a run here, is what it looks like early. And so there's always the question of how do pieces play together, right? So even like with the Game Breakers, sure, they have more players that weren't there, and Gian Avedijian, Hachi Amini, David DePina were able to kind of do their thing and carried the team to victory in week 1. If we add in other players like a Jose Mercado, like a Charles Alexander, like we talked about, you would always want to add those players to your team, but now there's still only one basketball, right? So not to pick on the Game Breakers, let's talk about the Road Dogs. They're going to be adding in 2 pieces from the winter who, sure, you like to play with other good players, so a lot of times teams can make it work. But is everyone as effective as they would be if they had the ball 50% of the time, right? So now they have it 33% of the time. They have it 30%. They have to split up, right? Who's able to do what? How do you stay in rhythm? How do you stay hot? So that goes for the Road Dogs as well. They're going to be adding 2 players who are good players, who will play defense, who made an impact for this team over the winter. But does that overall, for both of those teams I just talked about, do those players overall, are they a net positive or like a wash, right? Like are they adding something to the team? They're going to add defense. They're going to add different pieces. I'm talking more about offensively. Are they still able to get their points? So that'll be kind of what we see from these teams and how they're able to balance all of these different pieces. But yeah, and I know big game for the Road Dogs in week 2. We'll get to it in a second as we kind of touch on some of those matchups, but it is the Road Dogs and the Halfway Crooks in week 2 who were supposed to play over the winter, and I think the Road Dogs were a little scared. They didn't show up. I'm kidding. I know they had stuff going on, but we like to say they were scared. It's more fun that way. And so a big matchup in week 2 for the Halfway Crooks and Road Dogs. Let's get to the last game, the Air Mambas, another returning team, and the Muffin Tops. All right, so the Air Mambas take care of business, pull away early with a huge first quarter, and beat the Muffin Tops by a lot. It was the Muffin Tops' first game, so I know they were still trying to figure stuff out, and both teams had a good time, so that's ultimately what it's about. Let's talk about the Air Mambas really quick, and I'll get some stats up here. But the Air Mambas, your first time seeing them, they were a 6 seed out of 8 last year. In the winter, I believe, 6 or 5, and they'll kill me if I was wrong. But they were in that middle of the pack last season. So kind of where do you see them this season through one game and try to take what you saw talent-wise, right, and put it against a different team, and how do they look?
Yeah, well, I have them in the 2 right now, but I think that there's still a lot of season to go. They played a Muffin Tops team who I wouldn't be surprised, no spoilers, but if the power rankings comes out, they might be in the 12 spot. And let's say with the Muffin Tops, if we were playing Legacy Leagues 20 years ago, they could be up number 1, number 2, something like that. But just right now, with the way that they're looking, they're less good defensively, not as quick, and it was easier for the Air Mambas to rack up the points. And because of that, it's tough. It's same with Road Dogs. We'll see how they really play against a team who is good at defense, who can quickly close those lanes because they were wide open when they had just played their games. And so I also noticed Aiden Duazwa with lots of threes, lots of shooting, but lots of getting yelled at by his teammates for ball hogging a little bit. So maybe in a closer game, those chirps have more weight to them. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, great player, second most points on the team, and I think that the Air Mambas will be a team that make a run deep into the playoffs this year.
Yeah, just to give you some stats, Frank Smith, 9 points, 9 rebounds. And Nick Lemoyne for the Air Mambas led the way with 26 and 12. Aiden Dozos, as you talked about, 19 and 7. We can list all of them. They had 6 players in double figures as I'm looking at it right here on my screen. Spoiler, in the official power rankings, the Air Mambas will be more properly rated. And they can prove us wrong, and other teams will be upset where they're rated, or ranked as well. It's one game. It's tough, but the power rankings are meant to kind of, their opinion. So the standings are over here, which obviously the Air Mambas are tied for first. They're 1-0 in the standings, which is what matters. In the power rankings, a little different. And again, it's opinion. So try to keep it fair over there. All right, let's get to, as we look ahead a little bit, week 2. All right, and kind of what we'll end on. I know we're pushing 20-something minutes. But what we'll end on here, Kyler, is one matchup for week 2, and I'll get the schedule up on the screen in a second for the people watching. You can go to thelegacyleagues.com and see any week schedule you'd like, but what matchup are you most looking forward to in week 2, right? So I'll give you a second to think about it. We have, I guess, some potential ones that we'd probably talk about: the Halfway Crooks and Road Dogs, All Talk Sports and Washed Up Boys, 2 newer teams now going head-to-head. Lob City and the Air Mambas, which I think I'll save my opinion on that one. But Skyhawks and All Waves, right? I think the All Waves might have the size advantage over the Skyhawks, but how does that new team look against a different matchup than the Game Breakers, who they played in week 1? So which one of those, are you most excited for in week 2?
Yeah, well, what I am excited for is that all of these games have potential to be closer games, which is something that I'm really excited for. But what I am most piqued my interest by is that All Talk Sports versus Washed Up Boys matchup. 2 newer teams who maybe didn't have their best game that they wanted in the first round, but I think either way, both teams could rise up the rankings after this game. It's who will adjust quicker. Plenty of talent, not so much experience. Who can take that experience from week 1 and turn it into results week 2?
I like it in week 2. Yeah, I mean, the Halfway Crooks, like we talked about in Road Dogs, as you can see there. I'm going to put Kyler on the spot one more time. I love the analysis. All right, really putting you on the spot. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then we'll get out of here with a really good post-game show. Which player... Okay, so I see his eyes going. We'll give him a second to kind of think of one. But which player, okay, impressed you the most? And so I think some of the the player on the Washed Up Boys who dropped 35, Larole. We had, Joe Secatore and Colin Burns we talked about. We talked about the 3 players on the Road Dogs. It could be someone who maybe didn't lead their team in scoring but had a huge impact. It could be somebody on a losing team, right, that you expect to kind of go off again this week. Which player so far, and it's one game, so all of this, is going to change throughout the season, but which player, were you most excited to watch, most fun to watch, stood out to you? Who you got?
Yeah, it's a player who's sneaky. Not a lot of people would have said this, I don't think, but it's the man, the mustache, Jake Ashstetter on the Owl Waves. I talked about him earlier. He had a double-double, 14 points, 11 boards. I think that's something that can't be denied. He had the biggest impact in that All Waves versus Providence defense game, despite getting outscored by 4 players. And that's something that is the mark of a really great player. If he can put more points together even, I think that the Owl Waves could really surprise some people. But he is the one who rocked the mustache and rocked the top 3 best play, biggest block. And he was flashy. He protected the rim. He played great defense. And that's who I'm going to focus on. There's tons of great players, tons of players who scored more points, potentially had better games, but he's a sneaky pull, I think.
I love it. And it's so funny that he's one of those players in week 2 against a shorter, and sure there's a height limit, but against a shorter Skyhawks team is going to have to continue that impact for the All Waves to improve to 2-0. We talk about kind of some of the top plays we have coming up. We have the stats on the website. We do power rankings. We have the podcast every week. We have an all-star night where we're going to have to pick 14 or 16 players from all of these teams. So it gets tricky, especially with this many teams, to kind of narrow down the best players. There's still plenty of time for everyone to continue their all-star bids. We have a dunk contest, 3-point contest. So we'll be voting all of those players into those contests later on. But it's funny, some of the names that we continue to bring up. You talk about the mustache on the Owl Waves. Victor Cashew Jr. on Lob City has been rocking the mustache for years. So shout out to Dub, who hit the 3 and was celebrating, if you remember, in that first game for Lob City. And he's been a force on their championship teams. And he really didn't play too much. He didn't play in the winter. And then last summer, I think he was also kind of in and out. He looked back. He played. He made his presence felt in that week 1 game. So shout out to the other man rocking the mustache. I think that's it for mustache. There's a beard, and a couple guys have beards. We're talking mustache. We like it. Kyler, good job on the post-game show. First one down.
Thank you very much.
6 more games coming up in week 2. They take place on Monday and Tuesday in Warwick. And keep an eye on the website, thelegacyleagues.com, and our social media at legacy_leagues. Thanks for watching.